Story 1, a chilling encounter with a knife-wielding stranger. You always think you'll know what to do if something terrible happens: run, scream, fight back. At least, that's what I told myself. But when you're faced with the unthinkable, the reality is far more paralyzing than you can imagine. It started like so many other nights. Scrolling through my phone, searching for connection in the vast sea of social apps. As an autistic teenager, making friends in person wasn't easy. Online, I could be myself without the fear of misreading someone's tone or expression. That's where I met Leo. He was funny, kind, and easy to talk to. He told me he understood what it felt like to be different, to feel isolated and unseen. 4 weeks. We chatted every day, sharing secrets and jokes, building what felt like a real connection. So, when he suggested we meet in person, I didn't hesitate. That night, standing under the dim glow of the streetlights, I never expected my world to shift in an instant. I didn't expect to feel the cold steel of a knife pressed against my neck or hear the words that would haunt me for years to come. What would you do if a friend suddenly became your worst nightmare? It's strange how quickly someone can feel like a part of your life. When I first started chatting with Leo, I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to talk to. But he had this way of making you feel seen. Like every word you said mattered. He was different from the others I'd talked to online. He didn't just ask what my favorite movies were or what music I liked. He asked real questions. What makes you happy? What's the scariest thing you've ever been through? I told him about my struggles with making friends. How I often felt like I was on the outside looking in. He shared his own stories of feeling out of place, of growing up in a house where silence was more common than laughter. I think people like us are drawn to each other, he said once. We see the cracks in each other's armor. It felt true. I'd never met someone who understood me so completely. When he suggested meeting up, I was nervous but excited. Just a chill hangout, he said. No pressure. I told myself it was safe. After all, we'd talked for weeks. He wasn't a stranger. The night was colder than I expected. I stood on the curb outside my house, shifting from foot to foot as I waited. The streets were quiet. The kind of peaceful stillness that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. When Leo appeared, I almost didn't recognize him at first. He looked just like his photos, a little taller than I imagined, with shaggy dark hair and a hoodie that hung loosely on his frame. He smiled as he approached, and I felt my nerves ease slightly. Hey, he said, handing me a bottle. It was a wine cooler. I wasn't much of a drinker, but I took it anyway, not wanting to seem rude. We sat on the curb, passing the bottle back and forth as we talked. The conversation flowed easily, just like it had online. He told me about his favorite bands, the places he wanted to travel, and the things he wished he could change about his life. For a while, it felt like I'd made a real friend. But then, something shifted. It started subtly. Leo's laughter became less frequent, his responses more clipped. He began glancing over his shoulder, his eyes darting to the shadows like he was expecting someone, or something, to emerge. You okay? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up, brushing the dust off his jeans. You ever feel like everything's pointless? He asked suddenly, his voice low. The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? Like, no matter what you do, it doesn't matter. People don't care. They don't see you. I see you, I said, hoping to comfort him. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. Do you? Before I could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. The blade gleamed under the dim light, its sharp edge catching my breath in my throat. Don't move, he said quietly, his voice calm but laced with something darker. I froze, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might drown out his words. Leo, I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. What are you doing? He moved closer, the blade now inches from my neck. You don't get it, he said. You don't know what it's like to feel this, hollow. My mind raced. Was this a joke? A test? But the cold steel against my skin was all too real. You don't have to do this, I said, my voice trembling. We can talk. Whatever's wrong, we can figure it out. His grip on the knife tightened. Talking doesn't fix anything. People like us, we're just broken. I don't know where I found the courage, but somehow I managed to speak. I see your scars, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes narrowed. What? I see them, I repeated. You're hurting, Leo. I know what that's like. But this won't make it go away. It'll just make it worse. He hesitated, the knife trembling in his hand. I have scars too, I continued, lifting my sleeve slightly to reveal the faint lines on my wrist. I get it. I really do. But you don't have to do this. You're not alone. For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, he lowered the knife. I don't want to be like this, he said, his voice breaking. You don't have to be, I replied. But this isn't the way. He stepped back, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world had finally crushed him. Go, he muttered, not meeting my eyes. I didn't need to be told twice. I walked away, my legs trembling with every step. I didn't dare run, afraid that any sudden movement might set him off again. When I reached my front door, I turned to look back. He was gone, swallowed by the shadows of the night. Inside, I locked every door and window, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. The next morning, the reality of what had happened hit me like a tidal wave. My neck still felt the phantom weight of the knife, and my mind replayed the encounter on an endless loop. I blocked Leo on every platform, deleted the app and vowed never to meet anyone online again. But even with those precautions, the fear lingered. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every stranger a potential danger. I jumped at loud noises, avoided going out alone, and flinched whenever someone got too close. It wasn't just fear, it was a deep, bone-deep mistrust of the world around me. Years have passed since that night, but the memory remains as vivid as ever. I often wonder what would have happened if I hadn't spoken up, if I hadn't found the right words to reach him. Would I have become just another tragic headline? I still think about Leo sometimes. Was he truly dangerous? Or just a broken soul crying out for help? Did he ever get the support he needed? Or did he disappear into the shadows, taking his pain with him? I'll never know. But one thing is certain, that night changed me forever. It taught me the fragility of trust, the power of empathy, and the importance of listening to your instincts. What would you have done in my place? Story 2, A Dangerous Group Encounter. It's funny how a simple craving can lead you into the jaws of danger. That night, I wasn't thinking about risk or vulnerability, I just wanted a snack. The clock had slipped past 3 a.m. and my small apartment felt unbearably quiet. My roommates were all out for the weekend, and the absence of their usual chatter left the air feeling hollow. I'd spent the night gaming with friends online, laughing and bantering as we pushed through hours of competition. But when the session ended, an emptiness crept in, the kind of void you try to fill with anything. For me, it was hunger. The nearby corner store had always been my go-to for these late-night cravings. It was small, a little run-down, and frequented by the kind of people who didn't ask questions. But it was open, and that was all I needed. I grabbed my coat and keys, rolling a joint before heading out. The night air bit at my skin as I stepped outside. The streets eerily quiet. Normally, I found a strange comfort in the solitude of these walks. The world felt like it was mine alone, just me and the hum of distant streetlights. But something about that night was different. The corner store's neon sign glowed faintly ahead, its flickering light a beacon in the otherwise dark street. As I approached, I noticed a group of men lingering near the intersection. There were 4 of them, their figures half obscured by the shadows. At first glance, they looked like any group of late-night smokers, chatting idly as they passed around cigarettes. But something about their presence felt off. Maybe it was the way they glanced at me, too long, too intent, or the way their conversation seemed to hush as I neared. My gut tightened. I told myself I was being paranoid, letting the late hour and dim lighting get to me. Still, my pace quickened, and I focused on the store's door, just a few steps away. I was almost past them when one of them spoke. "Hey," he called out, his voice sharp enough to freeze me mid-step. I turned, my stomach knotting as the man stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a cocky smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Routine ID check," he said, holding up his hand as if flashing a badge. "Show us your identification." My heart sank. The words didn't make sense. Routine ID check? At 3 a.m.? My mind raced, trying to reconcile what I was hearing with what I was seeing. The man stepped closer, his grin widening. "You know, smoking in public is illegal, right?" he added, gesturing toward the joint tucked behind my ear. I stammered, caught off guard. I didn't know that." He chuckled, his friends closing in around me. They didn't wear uniforms, and none of them had shown any identification. Still, the way they moved, the practiced confidence in their voices, it was clear they were used to intimidating people. "Let's make this easy," the man continued, his tone light but dangerous. "Show us your ID and empty your pockets. Standard procedure." My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like lead. I glanced around, searching for someone, anyone who might intervene. The street was empty, the store's cashier visible but oblivious inside. "Come on," the man said, his patience thinning. "We don't have all night." I fumbled in my pocket, pulling out a crumpled €5 bill and a battered pack of gum. "This is all I have," I said, my voice trembling. The man's expression darkened. "No wallet? No ID? That's suspicious. Don't you think?" The tension was suffocating. They weren't going to let me go. I could see it in their eyes, the gleam of predatory delight, the way they fed off my fear. The leader's smirk returned as he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. What else you got? Huh? Don't make me check for myself. I knew I had to think fast. The store was just across the street. But the men were blocking my path. If I ran, they could catch me, or worse. And then, a desperate idea flickered in my mind. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stand taller. When I spoke, my words came out thick with a deliberate Russian accent. "My friends," I said, pausing to make it sound uncertain. "They have my wallet. We meet here. They come soon." The men froze, their confidence faltering. The leader narrowed his eyes, studying me. "Your friends," he repeated. "Yes," I said, nodding toward the store. "Big men. You wait. They come." The air grew heavy with tension. The men exchanged glances, their bravado cracking under the weight of my words. In my neighborhood, Russian gangs had a reputation for being brutal and unforgiving. If these men thought I was connected to them, it might be enough to scare them off. The leader hesitated, his sneer faltering. "All right," he said finally, his voice less certain. "But get us something to drink." Now, relief flooded through me, though I kept my expression neutral. I nodded, turning toward the store with deliberate slowness. The moment I stepped inside the store, the fluorescent lights felt like a lifeline. My hands were shaking as I grabbed a six-pack of sodas, my mind racing with what to do next. The cashier, an older man with tired eyes, watched me carefully. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, my fear warring with my instinct to keep quiet. Finally, I whispered, "There's a group outside. They're waiting for me." His expression hardened. "Stay here," he said firmly. He moved to the door, locking it with a sharp click before flipping the sign to closed. Together, we watched as the men lingered outside, their frustration growing with each passing minute. Eventually, they gave up, muttering curses as they disappeared into the shadows. I stayed in the store for what felt like hours, my heart still pounding in my chest. The cashier handed me a cup of water, his presence a quiet comfort. "You're lucky," he said after a while. "People like that, they don't usually let you go so easy." The weight of his words sank in slowly. I had been lucky. If the bluff hadn't worked, if they'd seen through my act, I didn't want to think about what might have happened. When I finally stepped outside, the streets were empty. The walk back to my apartment was a blur, every sound and shadow setting my nerves on edge. That night left a mark on me, one that hasn't faded even after all these years. I still think about the leader's grin, the way his tone shifted from playful to menacing in an instant. I think about the split-second decision to lie, the sheer desperation that fueled the bluff. Could I have handled it differently? Should I have screamed, fought, run? I'll never know. What I do know is this: the world isn't as safe as we'd like to believe. A late-night walk, a craving for snacks, it's all it takes to find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time. If you'd been in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have thought fast enough to bluff? Or would fear have taken over? Even now, I'm more cautious. I avoid walking alone at night, keep my phone within reach, and stay hyper-aware of my surroundings. That night taught me a lesson I'll never forget. Sometimes survival depends on quick thinking and a bit of luck. Story 3: The Staring Roommate. Moving to Toronto felt like a fresh start, a chance to step outside my comfort zone, I'd taken a gap year to improve my English and immerse myself in a different culture before finishing business school. Everything about the city felt vibrant and alive, the towering skyscrapers, the bustling streets, the endless rhythm of life. The apartment was nothing special, but it was affordable and close to my language school. A 3-bedroom shared unit. It came with one roommate already in place, Sandro. A Swiss-German giant with an infectious laugh and a love for cooking. We hit it off immediately, bonding over our shared experiences as international students. 4 weeks. The 3rd bedroom remained empty, its vacancy a strange void in the apartment. Sandro joked about the mystery tenant who would eventually arrive, imagining all kinds of strange characters. I laughed along, but part of me hoped for someone quiet, someone who wouldn't disrupt the easy balance we'd found. When Sandro left for a week-long road trip, I didn't think much of it. I figured I'd enjoy the solitude, maybe binge a few shows or explore the city on my own. What I didn't realize was that my life was about to take a very unsettling turn. The day the new tenant arrived was like any other. I went to my morning classes, grabbed lunch at a small cafe, and returned home in the afternoon. By 3 p.m., I expected them to show up, but the hours dragged on with no sign of anyone. By nightfall, I'd convinced myself they weren't coming. I made dinner, watched some Netflix, and finally went to bed around midnight. A soft knock at my bedroom door jolted me awake. Groggy and disoriented, I stumbled to the door. Standing there was a young Japanese woman, petite and quiet, with a suitcase by her side. She introduced herself with a shy smile and halting English, explaining that her flight had been delayed. We exchanged pleasantries, and I showed her around the apartment. She seemed polite but distant, keeping her answers brief and avoiding eye contact. I figured she was just tired from her journey. The encounter was so uneventful that I didn't give it another thought. But looking back, there was something about her demeanor, a subtle unease, that should have set off alarms. The first few days with her as my roommate were unremarkable. She stayed in her room most of the time, only emerging to cook or use the bathroom. Occasionally, she asked me for help navigating the city, how to use the subway, where to find the nearest grocery store. I didn't mind helping, in fact. I felt a little sorry for her. But then, things started to change. It began with the staring. One evening, I was lying on my bed, scrolling through my phone, when I glanced toward the window. The shared balcony connected all the rooms in the apartment, and I'd left the blinds partially open. There she was, standing outside, her figure illuminated by the soft glow of the streetlights. She wasn't looking at the skyline or the view. She was looking at me. I froze, unsure of how to react. Was she just lost in thought? Did she even realize I could see her? I waved hesitantly, hoping to break the awkwardness. She didn't wave back. Instead, she turned abruptly and walked back into her room. I laughed it off, telling myself it was nothing. But the unease lingered. The staring became a nightly occurrence. Every evening, like clockwork, I'd glance toward the window to find her on the balcony, her gaze fixed on me. It didn't matter if the blinds were open or closed, she always seemed to know when I was there. At first, I tried to ignore it, but as the nights went on, her presence felt more invasive, more deliberate. One evening, she knocked on my door to ask about the washing machine. It was the 3rd time she'd asked, despite me explaining it in detail before. Her questions were odd. Overly specific. And her tone flat. Almost mechanical. "Why don't we hang out?" she said suddenly. Her voice barely above a whisper. The abrupt shift caught me off guard. I stammered something about being busy and quickly retreated to my room, locking the door behind me. That night, I closed the blinds completely, hoping to block her out. But around midnight, I heard the faint sound of footsteps on the balcony. My stomach knotted as I realized she was out there again. Standing in the darkness. Staring. I didn't look. I couldn't. The breaking point came a few nights later. I had spent the day trying to avoid her, keeping to myself and only leaving my room when necessary. By the time evening rolled around, I was on edge. Every sound in the apartment setting me on high alert. At around 2 a.m., I was startled awake by a soft knock on my door. "Are you okay?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. The knock came again. Louder this time. My heart raced as I stared at the door, the faint glow from the hallway casting shadows beneath it. "Do you need something?" I asked, trying to sound calm. Again. Silence. Then, after a long pause, I heard footsteps retreating down the hall. I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me, until I glanced toward the window. She was there, standing on the balcony, her face pressed close to the glass. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and fixed on me. For a moment, I couldn't move. My mind screamed at me to do something, but my body felt paralyzed. Then she reached for the sliding door handle. I shot out of bed, slamming the lock into place just as she tried to open it. Her face twisted in frustration, and she banged on the glass once, twice, before retreating into the shadows. The next morning, I packed my bags. I didn't care about breaking the lease or losing the security deposit, I just needed to get out. I called Sandro and told him everything. He was shocked, insisting he'd never noticed anything strange about her. "Are you sure you didn't imagine it?" he asked. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to think it was all some misunderstanding, that she was just socially awkward or dealing with culture shock. But the memory of her staring through the glass, her hand on the door handle, told me otherwise. By afternoon, I was gone. Even now, I can't make sense of her behavior. Was it loneliness? Curiosity? Or was there something darker at play? Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't locked the sliding door that night. Would she have simply walked in? Or was her persistence a sign of something far more sinister? I'll never know. And maybe that's for the best. What would you have done in my place? Stayed and confronted her? Or left like I did? As the camera lingers on the eerie scene, the unsettling silence is pierced by a faint creak, the sound of the balcony door. The young woman's terrified eyes dart toward the shadowy figure, still staring through the glass. But just as her trembling hands move to lock the window, the screen cuts to black. What happens next? Is the roommate truly harmless? Or does something far more sinister lurk behind those emotionless eyes? Your curiosity is piqued, but the answers will have to wait. Stay tuned for the next gripping tale on Wolf Tells, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs. If you enjoyed this chilling story and want more spine-tingling mysteries, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Wolf Tells. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next thrilling upload. Until next time, sleep tight, if you dare.